Tantor Audio, a division of Recorded Books, presents Mary, the Mary Tyler Moore Story, by Herbie J. Pilato, narrated by David Vries. I really want to be taken seriously. Mary Tyler Moore. Doesn't that sound serious? Mary Tyler Moore. Prologue. Mary has what we call star quality. So said Perry Lafferty, former vice president of programming for CBS in 1974, about the Emmy-winning actress who portrayed the ambitious, single, career-minded Mary Richards on that network's groundbreaking 1970 to 1977 sitcom, officially and simply titled Mary Tyler Moore. She's the well-scrubbed, all-American girl that everyone likes, continued Lafferty. It's her vulnerability that makes her particularly appealing. She's also beautiful and all that without being threatening. Such words could also describe Moore's previous CBS television sitcom incarnation, Laura Petrie, the loving and devoted wife to Dick Van Dyke's Rob Petrie on The Dick Van Dyke Show, which originally aired from 1961 to 1966. But despite her two most famous near-picture-perfect depictions on screen, Moore's real life and career were marred by tragedy and blurred by indecision. She may have played TV's top, blithe, independent woman, married or single, but her spirit off-screen was boxed in. She grinned in public for years, but grimaced in private, cloaking the not-so-easy moments and the toughest of times. She worked until she was physically incapable of doing so. She lived her life to the fullest and remained dedicated to her craft and various social, political, and charitable causes connected to animal advocacy and the diabetes with which she struggled. Dependent on much and many, Moore frequently sought the approval of others, be they family, peers, friends, colleagues, fans, food, wine, medicine, God, or men. The latter dominated, shaped, shifted, and manufactured her life and career, for better or worse. Her father was a fervent academic, demanding and disparaging. She spent a lifetime trying to please him, if mostly with her art. As a child, she was sexually abused by a male neighbor. Emotionally and psychologically scarred for life, she channeled her trauma into her craft. Also, as a child, she once noticed a man beat a dog on the street, thus planting the seeds of her championing and affection for animals. Once again, she turned lemons into lemonade. Moore's first marriage was to Richard Dick Meeker, an older man, with whom she had a son named Ritchie, who died young. Some macabre fate echoed these facts in her career. Her first TV marriage was to Dick Van Dyke, an older man, with whom she had a TV son named Ritchie, with a T, played by Larry Matthews, who lives immortal in reruns with her as Laura and Van Dyke as Rob. It was Van Dyke who saved Moore's career twice in her life, first by endorsing her as his TV wife on The Dick Van Dyke Show, and later by featuring her in Dick Van Dyke and the Other Woman, a TV special that led to Mary Tyler Moore, a.k.a. The Mary Tyler Moore Show. Both career moves, however, were ultimately navigated and controlled by Grant Tinker, Moore's second husband. Tinker headed an ad firm that controlled The Dick Van Dyke Show. Moore later partnered with Tinker to form MTM Enterprises, which hired male writers Jim Brooks and Alan Burns to create The Mary Tyler Moore Show. This program featured a male father figure named Lou Grant, played by Ed Asner, a seeming homage to Grant Tinker. While every character on the show, including Valerie Harper's wisecracking Rhoda Morgenstern, referred to Asner's character as Lou, Moore's Mary Richards called him Mr. Grant. Beyond her TV time on the Dick Van Dyke and Mary Tyler Moore shows, both of which earned her multiple Emmy Awards, Moore never again found a weekly hit on the small screen. There was a measure of success on Broadway with Whose Life Is It Anyway?, which earned her a special Tony Award. The following year she garnered an Oscar nomination and won a Golden Globe for 1980's Ordinary People, a feature film directed by Robert Redford. It was a movie she once referred to as the holy grail of her career, released 3 years after her legendary sitcom ended. But Moore's first Broadway play, a musical rendition of Breakfast at Tiffany's, was a colossal flop, as were her other motion pictures like Change of Habit with Elvis Presley. Alternate TV series included 2 variety show attempts, Mary and the Mary Tyler Moore Hour, 2 sitcoms, Another Mary and Annie Maguire, and a 1-hour drama, New York News, all clunkers. Most of her television failures followed Moore's divorce from Tinker, whose expertise rested mostly in the medium. Tinker was the one who insisted that her role on the Dick Van Dyke Show be expanded, who secured the success of the Mary Tyler Moore Show by surrounding his wife with an A-list group of talented individuals before and behind the camera. Moore's feature films tanked because Tinker knew little about what makes a good motion picture. In the big picture scheme of things, the success of Ordinary People seemed like a fluke, a lucky break that transpired shortly before a direly unfortunate incident occurred off-screen. She finally had a big screen hit, but in her mid-40s, which is not only a late-in-life stage to reach movie stardom, but also too young for any parent to lose a child. But that's exactly what happened. Shortly after the release of Ordinary People, in which Moore played a disheartened, distant woman named Beth Jarrett, who was dealing with the death of her son, she lost her real-life child. Ritchie died of an accidental self-inflicted gunshot at only 24 years old. Their relationship was never strong, and Moore never thought herself a good parent. She was career-minded and success-oriented in every way, but with her maternal instincts. In like manner, Moore was a talented performer, but she often relied on her charm and personal appeal. Her strengths as an actress were never fully realized or utilized on the big screen because Tinker knew her talent was best suited to the small screen, primarily in a sitcom. But even then, Moore was outshined by veterans like Dick Van Dyke and other stars of his legendary sitcom, including Rose Marie, Maury Amsterdam, and Carl Reiner, who, like Meeker and Tinker in her personal life, was a father figure in her professional life. Later, on the Mary Tyler Moore Show, she was paired with even stronger talents, such as Ed Asner, yet another professional father figure, as well as female supporting players Cloris Leachman, Betty White, and Valerie Harper. Harper was an outstanding newcomer, a shining star in the making, a scene stealer in every way. But when Moore's marriage to Tinker ended, so, it seemed, did continued chances for weekly TV sitcom success. Additionally, her physical state was weakened by diabetes. She tried to drown her emotional pain in alcohol. She attempted to hide and enhance her low self-esteem with various facial plastic surgeries, which ultimately did not service her health. Moore eventually married a 3rd time, to Dr. Robert Levine, who, unlike Meeker or Tinker, was not a father figure, but instead many years younger than she, potentially a son figure. Levine, steadfast and loyal, was not a member of the cultural elite or the entertainment industry. He was a cardiologist who was devoted to his older wife, their relationship, and her well-being. If not by Moore's side in her youth, Levine was present to help her deal with the lingering, less appealing aspects of her past that at times poisoned her experiences in any era. Theirs was a remarkable, real-life love story, one that rivaled not only her union with Tinker, but that of Rob and Laura Petrie's fabricated wedded bliss. Moore found Levine just as Van Dyke eventually discovered new love with Arlene Silver, a 40-something makeup artist who became his second wife 28 years after he divorced his first wife, Margie Willett, and 3 years after Michelle Triola Marvin, his longtime lover, died of lung cancer. Adding to the irony was this. Van Dyke had initially perceived Moore as too young to play his TV spouse on The Dick Van Dyke Show. Mary Richards, Moore's other famous TV role, may have made it on her own, but the actress was not so blessed. although she did discover and cherish love early, midterm, and relatively late in life, while morsels of success blossomed in the twilight, afternoon, and morning glories of Moore's career. Each drop of rain on her parade through life was followed by a ray of sunshine. While much of that may sound as cheery as Mary Richards, when push came to shove, that's exactly who Moore emulated, whether she admitted it or not. As an artist, her work was never done. From heartache and pain sprouted joy and victory when she stayed in the game. For most of her life and career, she was more or less on her game. Had she been less consistently successful throughout her private and public arenas, Moore may never have had the opportunity to turn the world on with her smile. However, that grin ultimately camouflaged the frowns, fears, and tears that she somehow reconfigured for the benefit of all that fell victim to its charm. Although she failed to recapture the weekly TV magic of Mrs. Petrie of the 60s or Ms. Richards of the 70s with any new series in the 80s or beyond, Moore never stopped trying. She fought the good fight as long as possible. Her childhood, teenage years, young adulthood, middle age, and senior moments were littered with challenges, but she had inherited from her parents a secret weapon to battle, confront, conquer, and shield herself from conflict, a unique sense of humor which she once referred to as subdued. With TV, film, or stage performances, she combined an A-type personality with A-list talent that left an indelible impression. On screen, Moore portrayed the perfect wife and mother on The Dick Van Dyke Show, the ideal, career-minded single woman on The Mary Tyler Moore Show, and everything else in between. Audiences continued to embrace her performances even when she periodically portrayed unlikable characters. Despite the quality of character or the periodic lack of a solid platform, watchers could not get enough of the actress behind the performer behind the portrayal, and sometimes the betrayal. Moore became an award-winning, multi-talented entertainer who acted, sang, and danced. She showcased comedy or drama, and did it all with style and grace. As the musical theme to her iconic TV show will forever remind us, who can turn the world on with her smile? The answer was and will always remain the beloved, non-fictional Mary Tyler Moore, known to that world mostly as Mary, the name which in turn serves as the title for this book. It's the first full-scale, in-depth, objective biography of her extensive life and career, before, during, and beyond her two most famous sitcoms, including her early and later TV and movie roles, stage performances, and her several personal appearances on talk and award shows, and at charitable galas and other events. Mary, the Mary Tyler Moore story, mixes rare, never-before-published commentary from the performer, her family, friends, and colleagues, culled from previously printed, filmed, taped, and/or recorded interviews. Intermingled are pertinent insight and remarks tallied from preceding books and periodicals, as well as websites and other online sources, along with observations gleaned from exclusive, all-new conversations with some of those who knew her best throughout the entirety of her remarkable personal and professional existence. Act 1. Born Identities. Chapter 1. The iron-willed, strong-minded, and compassionate Mary Tyler Moore hailed from a family whose history was immersed in military and rigid rules. Although she was none too pleased that her ancestors mostly made their mark in war, it's a legacy that prepared her for battles of her own, some of which she lost, in some of which she prevailed, all of which she confronted head-on. With creative differences at work or at home, the actress, the businesswoman, the philanthropist, the human being, throughout her life and career never backed away from a challenge. When conflicts arose, she confronted each accordingly, whether personal, professional, emotional, psychological, or physical. She considered none as obstacles, but rather par for the course, and never felt sorry for herself because she hailed from that sturdy stock. For years, Mary would speak of her alleged link to Captain John Moore, to whom she several times referred as a distant relative who stowed away to America from England circa 1765 on an importing tea ship. But according to genealogist James Pilato, there are several stowaway to America stories that are commonly repeated but remain unproven. Mary was given some incorrect information about her ancestry, Pilato said diplomatically. The more clearly defined and documented family line involved Lieutenant Colonel Lewis Tillman Moore, a commander of the 4th Virginia Infantry in the Confederate Army, who purchased a Gothic Revival home in Winchester, Virginia. He offered it as the headquarters for Major General Thomas J. Stonewall Jackson. Jackson resided 4 months in that home, today known as Stonewall Jackson's Headquarters Museum. Lieutenant Colonel Moore returned there to the practice of law after being severely wounded at Manassas in 1861. He married Mary Fanny Bragonier, the daughter of Daniel George Bragonier, a noted minister of the German Reformed Church. Fanny's mother, Mary E. Schindler Bragonier, whose family name was originally spelled Schindler, with a C, was the great-granddaughter of George Conrad Schindler of Württemberg, Germany. He arrived in America at the port of Philadelphia in 1752. According to historian and author A.D. Kennemund, Schindler, a Revolutionary War soldier, apparently made a copper kettle for Martha Washington that was later on display at Valley Forge. In 1872, Lieutenant Colonel Moore and Fanny welcomed a son, George Melville Moore. He later moved to New York, where he worked as a treasurer for an electric company, and married Anna Veronica Tyler, a native of that state. Their son, George Tyler Moore, known by his middle name, and his mother's maiden name, a family tradition, was born in 1913 in Brooklyn, and due to his father's well-paying job, attended private schools. Like his father, Tyler was later employed as a clerk by an electric company, by then alternately known as Consolidated Edison, Con Edison, or Con Ed, in New York. In that same city, on January 24, 1936, Tyler, a Catholic, secured a marriage license with Marjorie Hackett, a Protestant who converted to Catholicism. On December 29, 1936, in the upscale suburb of Brooklyn Heights, their daughter, Mary Tyler Moore, was born. Her middle name continued the family tradition of utilizing the paternal grandmother's maiden moniker. She arrived shortly before World War II began, near the end of the Depression, and 9 years after television was created, when America and the world were ready to smile again. Comedian Milton Berle, who made his name in vaudeville and later as Mr. Television, the star of NBC's Texaco Star Theater from 1948 to 1956, helped shape the small-screen medium which would give Mary, who would later become his friend, a career. The day Mary Tyler Moore was born, Berle would observe, the world became a better place. In many of her earliest days that followed, Mary attended St. Rose of Lima Catholic School in Brooklyn. In time, she became the eldest of 3 siblings, presiding over her brother John Hackett Moore, born 1944, and a sister Elizabeth Ann Moore, born 1956, who also received a Catholic education. According to The Real Mary Tyler Moore by Chris Byers, their mother Marjorie said Mary was one of 3 only children because they were born 36 months apart. Marjorie called Mary a pain in the neck to raise, due to her child's fervent desire to dance and act. With no clear life or career direction of her own, Marjorie stayed home, while George, like his father before him, continued to work diligently in New York. An average student in elementary school, Mary was shy in the classroom at St. Rose's, but let loose upon hearing the day's final school bell ring. She'd pester her cousins who resided close by into presenting shows in her backyard. Even then, I was frantic to become a performer, she told Byers. By no means wealthy, her family lacked for nothing beyond currency. In a videotaped conversation that was conducted by filmmaker Carlos Ferrer, Mary related that her father had said she was born in the impoverished nobility of Brooklyn Heights. When Mary was 4 years old, the Moore family relocated to larger quarters in Flushing, only to return to the Flatbush area on 491 Ocean Parkway 2 years later. For an interview with the Brooklyn Daily Eagle, Mary later described her neighborhood as made of homes with tree-lined front yards. Some people had Fords or Hudsons, but everyone took the elevated train when they traveled to Manhattan to catch live shows or the latest movie and stage show at Radio City Music Hall. The New York Times later observed, Mary Tyler Moore may not quite rank with Pee Wee Reese, the old Dodger shortstop, as a symbol of Brooklyn, but the organizers of Welcome Back to Brooklyn Day eventually dubbed her Homecoming Queen. In her defense, the adult Mary sent a scathing letter to the editor detailing a core portion of her early childhood. I was more than a little resentful of the suggestion in your article that I was an inappropriate choice to reign as queen for Welcome Back to Brooklyn Day on June 9, 1996. Anyway, I thought I was to be king. Regardless of my worthiness, it does seem to me that type should play no part in this warm-spirited ceremony. One wonders what your greatest concern is. Am I not funny enough? I can slip on a banana peel with the best of them. I was born in Brooklyn Heights in 1936, where we lived for a short time before moving to Flushing. When I was 6, we returned, this time to Ocean Parkway in Flatbush. It was in this neighborhood that I lived for the next 3 years, learning much about the spirit that produces laughter, fear, anger, and, last and above all, tolerance. The Moores and one other family were the only Catholics in an Orthodox Jewish community where my grandfather owned the house that we would live in. I made my first communion at St. Rose of Lima Church, and took no small amount of kidding for the bride-like veil I wore on that particular Sunday. Well, so are you married to God now? No, stupid. How come you can't touch money sometimes? And what's the big deal about sundown? We never let each other forget our differences, fistfights being a regular part of our activities. I don't think I was without a bruise or scraped knees for the whole time we lived there, nor were some of them. But I remember feeling that whatever the bullying, we also had fun. We knew we were struggling with more than childhood's fight for supremacy and territory. There were differences that could have been given indelible names, but weren't. Instead, we found ourselves, and we found ourselves to be friends. It's that kind of intelligence and, well, spunk that was part of her appeal. That descriptive word was spoken by Ed Asner as Lou Grant to Mary Richards in Love Is All Around, the pilot episode of The Mary Tyler Moore Show. But this combination of smarts, courage, and comedy played an important part throughout Mary's life, even before she began her career. She said her parents blessed her with an appreciation for humor. They made her think and feel what's funny, while Mary learned to welcome the laughter in others, though not as a class clown, which she never wanted or tried to be. Her parents may not have had money, but they both majored in English in college and taught her how to speak correctly. We never wanted for anything, Mary said. We never went hungry. There weren't a lot of luxuries, but dancing lessons were arranged when Mary wanted them. Although proud of her Brooklyn influences, as were and remain many celebrities born in that historically rich and cultural place, in time she sought to leave it all behind. That happened in one sense at just 3 years old, when Mary would entertain members of her immediate and extended family at home in her living room, sometimes alongside other young relatives. She and her same-age cousin Gail would hijack their relatives, Mary said, tie them to their seats, and then perform musical numbers which the two young girls had witnessed at the movies. In self-defense, Mary thought, she was sent to dancing school so that, if they had to watch me, at least I'd be trained and it wouldn't be too painful. At first, Mary had only danced for her dad, to win his love and approval. If I had that wonderful, perfect, loving relationship with my father that everybody craves, she said, I might not have had the gumption to do what I do now, to put myself on the line. I guess it's too bad we didn't have a close, loving relationship, but who's to say? Maybe not. I like what I am. I love what I do, and he formed me. Thank God I was not being abused in any way, she later told the Ottawa Citizen in addressing the reason she exited her initial household. But I was seeking approval of some sort in many different ways. Mary's core, love-unlike relationship with her father in particular seemed to shape her associations with men, specifically her first two husbands, a habit from which she was unable to disengage until her mid-40s. But now, before the first television sets could be found in every household across the country, little Mary would stay close to the radio and improvise steps to the songs she heard. Come nightfall, she would perform a personal recital, again, just for her dad. Nevertheless, it was her maternal grandfather who was most impressed with her performance skills. One day he watched her dance around the living room and gave an altogether untypical response. This child, he said, will either end up on stage or in jail. Mary had always desired stardom, and would settle for nothing less than complete artistic expression, beginning with a focus on one particular craft. Mary said her childhood was relatively happy, but she was kind of quiet, a loner. But another time, Mary described herself as an angry youngster, not happy about a lot of stuff. I supposed somewhere along the way that worked itself into a self-protection mechanism. If I cut myself off at the knees first, then nobody else can. And if I can do it with humor at the same time, why, God, that's just great. And I always felt more comfortable with a stronger, taller, older, wiser mate by my side, which is basically a chicken-hearted way of going through life. I grew up feeling that women are wonderful, but wonderful as an adjunct to a man. And if there was a fight or a difference of opinion about something important, then I must be wrong. I must just not have it right yet. In other words, she would smooth things over and look at the bright side. While mates would arrive much later in her life, Mary as a child focused solely on dancing. From the time she was very young, Mary knew what she wanted to be. Only then I thought it was a dancer, she later told the New York Times. Another time she told American television, "Some people refer to it as indulging in my instincts and artistic bent. I call it just showing off, which is what I did from about 3 years of age on." Years after, for an interview with a Toronto Star, Mary said her first formal dance instructor, a mentor/dance pianist, was not exactly the easiest person to please. She was frequently forced to smile, if out of fear alone. Yet those early attempts to turn her internal frown upside down eventually worked in her favor. Her smile began as a coping mechanism and became her trademark. Unlike her studies in dance or music, the relatively reserved young lady never received formal training in acting. Still, she craved the kind of attention actors receive and dove into the profession head first. Shy people who haven't had the amount of attention or love that they think they need, she said, go into public arenas. I think they get something back, a validation. That gives you an awful lot. It's terrific. It doesn't supplant the original need. Mary developed an aggressive and courageous spirit to face a myriad of challenges, including her molestation by a male neighbor when she was 6 years old. She detailed this horrific incident in her best-selling memoir, After All. The Archers lived next door to the Moores in their apartment complex. The abuser was the father of Mary's friend, little 6-year-old David Archer. The day after she was molested, Mary defiantly marched down the hall and knocked on the Archer's door. David answered, and Mary told him point by point just exactly what his father had done. Afterwards, she felt vindicated but a little sick at what she had done to David. Such treachery, however, was magnified by the reaction of Mary's mother to the incident, By not acknowledging her daughter's abuse, Marjorie Moore pretended the molestation never transpired, and as Mary later expressed to
Sample complete. Ready to continue?